Hello, everybody, and welcome to this Hyperledger In-depth webinar series. We are starting in just a couple of minutes. In the meantime, I would encourage you to use the chat button and tell us where you are zooming in from. I'm zooming in from sunny Scottsdale, Arizona. We will just wait a minute or two, and then we are starting with our webinar. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody, depending on where in the world you are zooming in from. I would encourage you to use the chat button, say hello, and tell us where you are zooming in from. We will get started in just a couple of minutes. Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. And welcome to the Hyperledger In-depth webinar series with KrypC. We will get started in just a minute. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Hyperledger In-depth webinar series with KrypC on simplifying enterprise blockchain with KrypCore. We are delighted to share with you this member webinar. My name is Tomasz Sedej, and I'm an ecosystem manager at the Hyperledger Foundation, and I'm happy to be hosting this webinar today. I will introduce our panelists and take us through some housekeeping. So first of all, if you attended any other webinar series, then you are already familiar with our housekeeping rules. So what I would like to say is that everybody is welcome in the Hyperledger community, and we are committed to creating a safe and welcoming community for everybody. For more information, please visit our code of conduct, which is available on our website and on our wiki. All the Hyperledger webinars are governed by the Linux Foundation antitrust policy, which I would encourage you to read, and you can find it on our wiki and on our website as well. This session is being recorded, and it will be available on our webinar library along with the slides, so you can always go back and review the information shared today. This meeting, this webinar is also being live streamed, so also welcome everybody joining us live through YouTube. Now we are encouraging or trying to make these sessions very interactive and engaging. So please stay active and get the most out of it. Feel free to use the raise your hand button to get unmuted and to speak up. And the more activity and participation we will have, the better experience there will be for everybody. You are also very welcome to use the Q&A box or just use the questions, the chat box for your questions. In case we ran out of time or we cannot answer all of your questions, you are also very welcome to join our Discord channel, which I will share at the end of the presentation. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce our panelists. So it's Akshaya, Mohit, and Ravi from KrypC. And without further ado, Akshaya, over to you.
Thanks, Tomas. Good morning, everyone. My name is Akshaya Ravi, and I'm a VP at KrypC Technologies. We're here today to speak about how easy it is to develop and deploy Hyperledger Fabric using KrypCore. KrypCore is our flagship product that is built to power any blockchain lifecycle development with low code, easy to integrate modules that enable enterprises to accomplish all their blockchain goals. Handing it over to Mohit to take it forward for the presentation.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Give me a second. Let me share my screen. Yeah. Yes. So I hope my screen is visible to everyone.
Yes, it is.
So yes, thank you. So we are here to discuss about developing and deploying Hyperledger Fabric application using KrypCore. So before we go ahead, like for any developer, for any organization, if we have to develop applications for the Hyperledger Fabric protocol, most of us would be aware that we have sets of SDKs and excellent community, and then we have a lot of resources online using which everyone is ensuring that how we can go and create good application as fast as possible. Having said that, in the journey of development, we get into something called the chain code, which is like in other protocols referred as smart contract. So once we get into the life cycle, we would realize the most essential thing for actually feel a blockchain application on Hyperledger Fabric is nothing but the business application which we have developed and deployed, and then rest all the activity what business sees, basically how they are able to interact their business event, which is actually coded on the chain code. Now in the subsequent slide, I will try to go through the entire journey and then express how we have taken the approach and how we have met that particular aspect of the development and release cycle much easier. So the key features of KrypCore is basically quick and easy. So the idea is, let's be quick. Like we think that we have a use case, think about the use case, either code it and then just start interacting with it, and then multiple deployment options like virtual machine to Kubernetes, and then these two steps are something which everyone would be knowing and want to go ahead. Then comes the next three topics like cost management and optimization, operation, governance, security, and maintenance. So this comes in our journey when we have crossed the POC lifecycle, the development lifecycle, and moving towards UAT production. And if something is in production, how do we maintain it? So I'll be covering those aspects also. How in a Hyperledger Fabric journey, these are also equally important. Yeah. So let's start with how it is quick and easy. So basically what we have done is we have created an interactive GUI driven approach. So the idea is basically if we have to create a network interaction, we have to do chain code management, channel management, all those things we have made it significantly easy. Either you use a hosted API or you use the user interface and just finish it out. So, and then now for a developer to start with, you will always have the question that what is the identity using which I need to interact with the network or my business logic. So use the identity management wallet to create the users and start interacting. The whole logic is basically to be more focused on the Hyperledger smart contract chain code development rather than Hyperledger administration. So as I was mentioning earlier, there would be different types of people in the community. Some would be more focused on business application development, and many of us, like for example, including me, who would be interested in the complete ecosystem. For example, not only the smart contract, but also the administration, which have its own technicalities, and then those things. But the idea is let's start with the approach of creating a good use case, and then during the journey of our development, we could also get into the complexities of Hyperledger Fabric and how easy it is, how to get to know more about it. We could do so. Let's segregate use case development and administration. So in doing so, the expected skill set is we have to be very focused on how to write a chain code. So chain code in Hyperledger Fabric, as of today, we are able to write either in Go language, Java, JavaScript, Node.js. And how do we deploy this? We use the interactive GUI to deploy the chain code. And now we just use the REST API. So most of the developer community today, for various reasons, everyone is familiar with REST API. So they could use language of their choice and then execute a REST API to perform a transaction, query a transaction to get a report. And we would still require some details of, for example, any business case, endorsement policies, private data collection policies. Those are the things which everyone should be reading, because a use case, when we develop, we would be writing some data in the state, getting some data on the state, would be performing certain validation. But on the overall, endorsement policies are very important, like how which parties to get endorsement, which data to keep it private. All those things a developer would need to focus, because these are the true foundation of a use case. Means logic plus how it is administered in the network. What is the policy for visibility of the data and how to get the proper approvals. So those things, as I mentioned, are the core essence of a business use case. So let me go into the next slide. So the core idea of when we approach creation of KrypCore, and then going through all the 9 yards of Hyperledger Fabric from 0.6 version to 1, and today it's a 2.4 version. So we have gone in depth. So we wanted to ensure that the entire community gets to interact and gets to develop on Hyperledger Fabric in a simplified and a focused manner. So as I was mentioning earlier, so if there is a use case, let's think about the use case and then code the chain code, and then think more about the logic validation. Have I put the right functionalities, right validation in my business logic? And we would definitely like to abstract the Hyperledger Fabric administration and configuration related matters at this stage, how when a person or a developer would like to be more focused on the use case, and then they should be able to use REST APIs to perform any transaction. At that stage, Fabric SDK experience is not required. And one of the common thing which as a developer we have faced in any blockchain protocol is how do we generate reports. So there is a inbuilt feature which is based on a data lake concept, which is something similar to Hyperledger Fabric Explorer, using which we would be able to design reports. And any use case, any business application, even at the POC stage, is not final unless we do some level of integration. So for example, if an invoice is generated or a purchase order is created, some event have happened. So in the chain code, we would be all aware that there is a functionality of we could create events and then send it to the next level. But then that next level is something which we have to develop, like listen for that event and write some logic to perform certain actions. So we have made that simple as well. So if there is something which you think is of interest, for example, any event purchase order or something. So if that event happens, we could provide a endpoint, REST endpoint, and then that data would be sent to the line of business application through the REST endpoint. So this would even reduce the time to quickly go for the use case validation. Otherwise, you would have spent significant amount of time in the peripheral activities of a complete use case POC demonstration. But the whole approach, as I said earlier, simplified and focus on the design development and logic validation. Let me go into the next slide. So at various stages in our journey of development, as well as the type of business application, the client for whom this application is developed could demand different infrastructure where the application needs to be provisioned. So you could see in this slide on the left side virtual machines and on the right side managed Kubernetes clusters. So it is as simple as it's Docker supported. So any developer having Linux system, Windows system, Mac system, with the help of documentation, they could set the environment up, whether it is for development or whether it is production. So many of us still prefer the virtual machine model for the POC, UAT, and production. Similarly, there could be enterprises based on their existing skills and expertise for many of the enterprise applications which they are already working on, would prefer to stay with a very strong orchestration technology like Kubernetes. Most of the cloud today have their own version of managed Kubernetes services. For example, Azure, AKS, AWS, EKS, and some of the people also have their own private implementation of Kubernetes. So we try to make this simple. So in the deployment stage, whether it is in development or in production, we could deploy the Hyperledger Fabric network on a managed Kubernetes cluster and also deploy the required applications using a developer who could kickstart their development journey. So that's continuation from my previous slide. So the journey starts with development, POC pilot to production. Here we could see that in the development stage, design use case, perform integration, deploy multiple chain codes, POC, validate. So if we are good with the validation, it's fine, we could go to the next stage. Otherwise, we could go back, modify our chain codes, make some more adjustment to the use case or adjust the integration, and then keep performing the cycle. And then once we get into the production, we need to manage and possibly in future we need to scale. So at least development and POC, we got a fair amount of idea by now that what are the tools and skill set required. But once you get into production, there could be different sets of challenges which are more tuned towards the chain code lifecycle, because as we proceed, we might have get user feedback or we need to add more functionalities, and typically developers would take the input from the stakeholders or the community and upgrade or redeploy the chain codes. But from the administrative perspective, there could be something like onboarding of new participants, or we have to deploy new peers, or we have to create new identities. So for that also, there are features provided in our application in KrypCore, which allows administration of the entire network, which is already in, let's say, pilot or production, to make amendments or to do the administrations without knowing the deep side of console-based programming or console-based access. So anyone with the basic skills with the documentation they will do, and it would also help Hyperledger Fabric administrators, certified Hyperledger Fabric administrators, basically do it using a user-friendly manner, and still for some power skills or something they could still get to the console and do it. The whole idea of KrypCore, before we get into the next slide, is it acts as a layer between a developer and administration and the Hyperledger Fabric. It doesn't mean that there are changes in the way people develop their smart the use cases, chain codes, or interact with the network. There is no change. It's as simple as any. For example, if we take the basic example of Hyperledger Marble example, create the test network, what we could deploy there, we could deploy here. And if we develop some smart contracts, chain codes using this application, this middleware, we can take this and then use in any other environment where there is a deployment of Hyperledger Fabric. So there is absolutely no change to the protocol. All the security settings and all the way developments have to be done remain intact. So we have completed the journey of how we move ahead from the developer's perspective, like how he starts the journey of development, POC to production. Now, when it comes to enterprise deployment, we could have different people having different skill sets, and they might have requirement of different infrastructure setup as I know. So to support and to make it easier for a wide variety of skill sets and enterprises, so there are multiple ways we could deploy Hyperledger Fabric Network. The simplest is a GUI-driven, super easy, which is quite interactive. We just need to specify what is the name of my organization, what is the name of the MSP, just interact with your cloud, provide the authentication, and then it takes care of the rest. This is also ideal for setting up of a simple development environment. Then comes really power users, enterprise, who are already in their journey, or not journey, they have already matured for non-blockchain applications, for development release methodology, using infrastructure as a code. They have their own M charts, scripts, and they are quite adept to how to use this Kubernetes cluster. So for them, all the Helm charts and, for example, Terraform infrastructure as a code, all the details are provided as documentation. So they could easily either integrate with their existing automation or use it as is and then perform. So this is definitely ideal for enterprises who wants to have a control over their infrastructure deployment and any process which is happening within. So DevOps or secure ops engineer. Then we also made it simple if some enterprise, specifically from Microsoft Azure point of view. So many of us would have worked in Azure and would be knowing about the Azure specific way of deployment, which is called ARM template. So we have also deployed ARM templates, which is publicly available in GitHub. So anyone could basically go to that GitHub repository and deploy a Azure instance of Hyperledger Fabric by just going through the steps there. So it would basically help you to create a cluster and use this particular ARM template to set up HLF network, and there would be documentation of certain scripts, and our network is ready. So it's again, as I said, it's ideal for the enterprises who wants to be in Kubernetes and who wants to use ARM template model for deployment. We would be adding more support in the public community as well, for example, in the coming days for AWS and Google. So it would be easier for anyone to deploy their own Hyperledger Fabric organization network. Then what is the other advantage which we had been focusing? Till now, what I have explained, my focus was always on shortening the time of the setting up of the development environment and the deployment of UAT and production. So that gives a clarity that we are trying to reduce and focus on our core areas, such as business application development and then management and administration of the network. So the idea is basically all this is leading to at least shortening of the time by 1/3, so which indirectly or directly we could say helped us to reduce a lot of cost. One of the other important thing is how do we forecast? So today, let's say I have started with 20 GB disk size. If there is a way that we are able to calculate per business transaction, what is the data one takes, right? For example, it is just for our estimation, we are able to figure out using a method that one business transaction is adding 5 MB of data in each peer and some amount of data in each order. It would help the infrastructure and the operations team to plan for hardware sizing and upgrades in future. So this is always a challenge when a developer is asked, like, how do we set up the initial infrastructure? So there is no proper calculation, right? That curve is still being learned by many of us. So we assume certain things and take a infrastructure. That infrastructure size could be much more than we want. It will take some time to reach there. So this type of data and tools makes it easy. In the POC state, we could learn those and then plan our future infrastructure. Then third is, as I was mentioning, we could use the notification system and integrate with line of business, which would have taken a lot of development effort. So that is in turn reduction of time, which is reduction of cost. Then in terms of generating reports, then Hyperledger Fabric administration is simplified. Many of the things we could do using UIs. And having said that, that doesn't stop us. We could still go into the console and perform administration if we have learned that Hyperledger administration, or we have people who are Hyperledger certified administration. We also have a low code option where if we want to experiment a feature where you don't need to develop smart contract chain codes, but basically use the user interface and define your business process. So that is like completely very, very low code or no code solution. And with our experience in the last 3-4 years working with multiple clouds and deployments, the initial configurations which we have actually put either in the ARM template in the public GitHub or the Helm-chart Terraform or any other mode of deployment is well suited for a single organization deployment. And the resource which we have used, the size which we have used is basically what we have learned over a period of time, which is neither very less, neither too much. It is good. So that's basically, it will help us to start the journey faster and also ensure that the cost of infrastructure is kept to an optimum as possible. Then how do we do operation, governance, and security? So one of the things after doing development and probably after POCs, how do we manage the Hyperledger Fabric identities? So as we all would be aware that the basic of interaction of any component in an Hyperledger Fabric ecosystem requires an identity. That identity could be user identity, application identity, peer identity, or an order identity. So how do we safeguard them? At least what is managed in the infrastructure, if a user is managing their own keys and certificates, it could be different only for how to manage them, but definitely peers, orders, and all the other things, the Fabric CA routes, the private key. So we have, with the experience, we have been successful in using various key vaults which are available in different clouds, and how do we mount them using the let's say the Compose YAML model or the Kubernetes YAML model securely, so that the best could be done in terms of protecting access to the infrastructure and getting access to those keys. So as we are all aware, Hyperledger Fabric is completely PKI driven. That's the very positive point compared to many other protocols. But at the same time, it also provides us a challenge that how do we safeguard them. So as a developer in the middleware application, what we have developed, for example, any use case which a developer releases, definitely it will have a backend and you will have the private keys there. And as a developer, we have a lot of libraries, whether it is HashiCorp Key Vault, or you could even interact with a HSM device. The capabilities are there and skill sets are there. But when it comes to Hyperledger peer and this one, so we again come into a scenario where either usage of HSM is too complicated or not as cost efficient considering the overall budget of the project. What best we could do is use key vaults. Now with key vaults, the challenges are different. The challenges, if I had developed the application, I would have used any of the, let's say, the SDKs provided by Key Vaults, for example, whether it is Azure Key Vault, AWS, or HashiCorp Key Vault. But as part of the governance model, no one would be expecting you to make changes to any of the Hyperledger Fabric components, whether it is peer order. So everyone would expect that the Docker image are pulled from Docker Hub, or we are pulling it from the Linux Foundation and then building it. So we found this as a challenge and we worked it out using certain methodology. So the code of peer orders of all the Hyperledger components remain intact, and we use certain technique in the cloud deployment that the keys and certificates of all this are involved, and they are the peers are still able to use them, and it is segregated from the other users who have access to the ecosystem. Then in terms of Kubernetes, how to have different namespaces and segregate different roles of different microservices. These are at the infrastructure level, and in the governance level, anyway, we have a simplified user interface using which a lot of administration can be done. Then comes maintenance. So maintenance is something definitely we will be touching once we have got into a UAT or production. We are all aware that all the fabric components, or most of the fabric components, they broadcast the metrics. So we are using intensively Prometheus and Grafana to capture those events and then create meaningful application out of it, which could be help us in reports and alerts. So if suppose some infrastructure appear is down, how the end user or the enterprise administrator needs to be alerted. So if a physical microservice is down, the industry would be aware that if a container is down, we could write certain things and make it aware that, okay, there is something which we need to take care. But what if endorsements are failing from a particular peer? Let's say we have 3 peers in the network, and the observation is 2 of the peers are always endorsing and 1 of the peers is always getting, let's say, timeout error or something. So this is a very special environmental issue. Any of the existing infrastructure detection systems, they would always feel that the peer is running because it is actually well responding. So we need to use this matrix and write certain logic. This was just one of the examples. In the Hyperledger Fabric context, there could be something similar examples, like if some infrastructure, some peer is taking more time for endorsement, some order peer is lacking. So how do we create those customized activity for monitoring, right? And then log monitoring and analytics. So the last part is basically one is cloud specific. We could use Azure Log Analytics workbook. We are using it so that the entire monitoring and analytics are presented and managed using a cloud specific component. And on the open side, we have also created a stack using Elasticsearch, Fluentd, Kibana. So that makes it more of cloud agnostic. If we have any deployment on any of the Kubernetes clusters, we would be able to use this to maintain with a bit of customization. So I think I have come to the end of presentation. There are certain technical slides left, but I think it would be good if you can, if any questions are there, so I can go in detail of them. And then if required, I can get into some other technical slides.
Thank you very much, Mohit. Are there any questions? There is nothing in the Q&A box, but feel free to unmute yourself, raise your hand, and ask the questions if there are any. Okay, so Mohit, I don't think we have any questions right now. Will you continue with the technical slides, and then if the questions pop up, we can return to that one?
Yeah, so I'll maybe quickly go through them, and so that if there are some question comes up, it may be helpful for them.
Great.
So these are supporting slides. So this basically talks about the architecture. So we are able to see in the at the end, we are able to see the smart contract chain code, wherein any developer could develop the chain codes and then just deploy them. And on the second layer from below, we are able to see all the services which are enabling, let's say, creation of identity, management of the network, routing your transactions, and then event PubSub allows us to integrate with, let's say, an endpoint if there is a transaction happen. And on the right side, you are able to see API. So the benefit of the system is just API. As a developer, I'm not getting into taking SDK, integrating it, and then understanding the core feature. So for a very, very basic developer who is just either not into blockchain or just getting into the blockchain, he just need how to know how to use this API to invoke a transaction or get a transaction, how to get the identity, everything is taken care. And on the top, these are something related to for the power user management, basically how do we deploy and how do we manage the network. Then this slide basically compares a typical developer way of starting the blockchain journey on Hyperledger Fabric versus if we start with this Sandbox. So in the sandbox model, as I said, multiple use case you are seeing at the end. So just focus on development of the chain codes, deploy them, validate them, edit them, and then test them. And in parallel, developers, what they could do is once they are good into that, they can get into all the nitty-gritties of and all the details of Hyperledger Fabric and continue their journey of the learning curve. So this way, the advantages they could demonstrate the use case applicability in much faster way, and at the same time, if they are focused on getting an administration or be a developer who knows all the 9 acts of Hyperledger Fabric, they could still continue working on the using the KrypCore model will not make them to only stick to this part. So that is one of the advantage here. Data management as the data lake. So one of the aspect is how do we have lot of meaningful data which gives a business intelligence to the end user, to the business, to the business application. So here we are able to see the data lake basically takes all the inputs from the blocks and the private data, creates a consolidated single database, and allows you to write your custom events. And for example, if you have a key whose value have changed, let's say 10,000 times over the last, let's say 20,000 blocks or 10,000 blocks, the auditor would be definitely interested to know which transactions were involved in changing a state variable from one value to another. So this helps to design the audit mechanism, audit reporting mechanism in a much easier way. Similarly, if we find that there are certain challenges, for example, there are transactions happening and for some reason, by some mistake, we are updating a key. For example, the value of some key X was 1, and it is observed that whenever a new transaction is happening, X is changing. But interestingly, we are able to see that something got written in the transaction, nothing was read. So it is typical that definitely there is something missing. A general business logic or a functional logic would definitely take the existing data, put some operation on it, and then the updated values should be saved again. So this would enable people who are monitoring to have better insights that, okay, there could be something wrong with what we have developed and deployed, so we could revisit it. So these are some of the insights which are provided by the system, not just the business reports. Notification service basically helps anyone to visualize a chain code transaction to something a business API notification in a much easier way. Then how do we do it? We have this user interfaces for example, managing the chain code lifecycle. So using this UI, basically, we would be able to deploy any of our chain code, upgrade them, or basically set the endorsement policy or the collection policies, and then go ahead with it. So as a developer, I just need to be more aware of how a policy should look like. And if I set a policy, what does it mean? But the syntax using the console and those nitty-gritties, they are not it's not mandatory for them at this point. Then for transaction, for example, I was giving an example, so you just need to think of a simple invoke and query message as any project where we are able to perform transaction using a JSON payload. Then if we have to before integrating our REST APIs with the line of business application, we could test this simple, what we call this as an execution window, where we could write the init ledger, the function name arguments, and on the right side, we are able to test it. So a developer, before start coding on their middleware application, they could see how their chain code is behaving once we have deployed them. Then governance. So governance, as I was mentioning, the core thing is once we have deployed, if we have to make changes to the network, the most complex of them is obviously addition or removal of a new member organization in the network, but we have other things like changing of batch size or batch time. So how do we handle them? So we would all be aware that there is something called the Hyperledger Fabric Administration, where we use certain peer commands and the JQ tool. Those things are again made simplified here. So using this interface, either we can use a UI or we could call the APIs, or we could use both these skills using this application or the administration and perform any of this task. For example, if you want to change the anchor peer, we want to modify the, we want to add more Hyperledger admins for an organization, we need to update the CRL. If we need to create a new channel, or we have to change the batch size, block time. So these are all something definitely a developer would get into once the things have gone into production. This is more towards the administration. Based on how the network is behaving, the stakeholders would like to either change the batch size or batch time, block time. But, as I said, these are more into administration. So this enables easy administration of the network post-production. Then if we have to upgrade the Hyperledger Fabric version, for example, today we have the latest 2.4. So, but in the journey, definitely people would have started with 1.0, then 1.1, 1.2, 1.4. So it makes it easy. So all these stakeholders basically could work together and add the new capability and update it. Yeah, so I think the identity management is just a way in which every member, the registrar of any member, they are able to create identities and manage the life cycle of identities. We could create more affiliations. So this is like a more granular more granular way of defining certain use case. For example, in a use case, we want to have within an organization, certain objects could be accessed or modified by a particular department. So we could create those affiliation, and in the same chain code, we could do access control, use the CID library, get the identity data, and perform logic. But from the administration side and the creation side, this UI makes it much simpler for the company to basically manage identities, create types of roles. And then if someone leaves the organization and they still have access to their identity, then how do we ensure that the transactions are not possible? So one of the key aspects, everyone knows that we could create identity. We could also create CRL, but if that CRL is not updated within the channel, still that ID could be used. So though many people would come at this stage, even a particular duration in production is over, but it's equally important that if some identities are not to be used, that then the respective members should basically not just discard them, first they should revoke them, generate the CRL, and then push it to the channel, so that in case the identity compromised, the data is compromised somewhere, the transactions cannot be done. So every user have a wallet, and what we have seen here that we are able to create identities. But what do we do if we are interacting with certain transactions are coming from a device, not by user? So basically, this enables us to download the key pair and the credential in something similar way. The Hyperledger Fabric folder structure comes, like when we use the SDK, we create a credential, it creates a certain way in which the folder structure is created, like the admin, peers, and signing key, certificate. It will create in something similar, and then people could use the choice of their SDKs and then integrate with the automation system to perform transactions. Yeah, and integrations and reporting. So this I have already covered. So to use REST API to integrate and then manage channel. Yeah, I think that's it from the technical perspective as well. And any queries?
Hello, please use the Q&A box or the chat, or feel free to unmute yourself and ask Mohit any questions you might have. Okay, are there any questions? Okay, I don't think we have any questions right now, Mohit. So thank you so much for your, oh, actually we do have one question, just a second. Bobby, please feel free to unmute yourself and just ask the question. Thank you.
Hello. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes,
Hello.
please.
Yeah. I am started learning. I was back Flutter developer, and now I started learning Web3. So in Web3, I have started learning of Solidity. So can you provide me like some sort of roadmap to move forward?
You are working on Web3. You plan to develop Web3 applications on the
Yes.
Hyperledger Fabric?
I was planning to develop like DeFi apps on Flutter. Like Flutter will be my front end and back end as a this blockchain DF. Like
Right.
I am not expert in this. I am just beginner. I am learning it.
Yes. So if we see the if you can mute yourself. Yeah, so I think you are mentioning about Flutter and Web3. So Web3 pillars are basically decentralized identity and decentralization of object storage, and then decentralization of all the static files your application might be having. So the fabric is anyway helping us in creation of identities and then creation of objects. So based on the use case, the privacy model, either you could design your data structure, put it in vault state, or you could use a combination of PDCs. For storage of heavy files and any media, we could use IPFS. And we need to slightly learn on the decentralized identity standard. So in Web3, every object also is a object as a thing is also an identity. So Hyperledger Fabric world state would act, world state or the blockchain would act as a storage of all the identities and all the objects. But how to structure it in the DID standard is something which I think you should start first. Like any object, for example, if it's a pen or a mobile phone, how to represent that in the DID format, store it in the using a transaction, and then how do you associate a relationship between two identities. So that's how I think your chain code development journey would start to create a true Web3 application.
So for learning that, which language I should learn? I have started learning Solidity right now.
Yeah, so Solidity is, for example, for Hyperledger, the other projects you could do, but for Hyperledger Fabric, you will have to use either of Golang, Java, or Node.js to write the smart contracts chain codes. So you will ideally, it's better you start learning either Golang or Java or Node.js, so you would be able to write a Hyperledger chain code and also work on the SDKs and interact with the network.
Okay, so thanks for sharing. Can you
Thank
provide
you.
some resources for that, or I should use YouTube only, or official
So
documents?
you could send a message. We will reply to you. You can send a message.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much, Mohit, for answering the question. We're at the top of the hour, so we're just gonna wrap it up. But please, Mavi, if you will have some further questions, you can join our Discord channel, or we can, or just ask Mohit directly. Well, first of all, Mohit, thank you so much for this great presentation. It's been really a pleasure, and it's quite a lot of information for the last 60 minutes. So let me just share my screen really quickly. So here is our Discord channel. You're very welcome to join it. You're well welcome to join our community, and we have various different channels related to projects, special interest groups, which are the industry-specific groups, our technical working groups, regional chapters, and much more. You can also scan the QR code to reach our Discord server. In 2 weeks, we have another webinar with Chainyard about finding the business value in trust through blockchain, and I'm inviting you also to join this one. And you can join, go to our events page and register there. Finally, we are back in live meetings. We are having the Hyperledger Global Forum from September 12 to 14 in Dublin, Ireland, and that would be a great opportunity to meet in person as well. The registrations are open, so please feel free to check our webpage or also scan the QR code to find more information on the Hyperledger Global Forum. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you to the panelists. Mohit, thank you again for all the information, and thank you everybody for joining, and hope to see you soon on the next webinar. Thank you.
Thanks, Tomas. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Akshaya.